Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a round 3 game from the second annual Gashimov Memorial 2015. This is a tournament held in honor of Vugar Gashimov, an exceptional player who represented Azerbaijan very well. He, at his peak rating, was ranked number 6 in the world, and he was really the player who revived, and in top-level play, the modern Benoni defense. Those of you interested in that specific opening, or more generally speaking, those of you interested in sharp, tactical, dynamic play, having a look at games played by Vugar out of the modern Benoni is likely time well spent. In this game here that we're going to have a look at, we have the world's top 2 players going at it. On the white end, world number 2, Fabiano Caruana, paired up against Magnus Carlsen. Let's have a look. Caruana opening with d4, Carlsen replying with the Dutch. White opts for a kingside fianchetto. Meanwhile, black sets up a Stonewall structure, having a grip over e4, strong grip over e4. The drawback is that e5 is weakened. Castles, bishop d6, keeping a watchful eye over that weak point. b3, queen e7. Not just some quick developing natural move like castles. Queen e7 is doing what? Preventing white from exchanging his bad bishop for a good bishop. Both sides get their queen bishop working. And now knight to d2. If the knight is playing to c3, this is masking the bishop's view of e5. If knight c3 is on board, black already has in mind a developing move with tempo. White's having to react. Knight d2 stays out of the way of the bishop, and taking it one step further, this queen knight may very well want to follow in the king knight's footsteps, pivoting on f3 to reinforce e5 once more. Black castles, rook c1. This is likely to be an open or half-open file, so quite logical with this tension here between c and d pawns. a5, looking for the a4 pawn break, activating the rook. This, by the way, is a move we wouldn't see if the queen knight had been played to the c3 square. Knight on c3 is there to conveniently defend against an a4 break. So e3 is the follow-up. This is a nice square for the queen. This is I believe, the main idea behind e3. The queen can develop by way of c2, but when you question the stability of the queen on the c2 square, it's probably not so safe. For one, it might run into some tempo with knight b4, and two, when or if the c file does open up, I'm not so sure how well the queen acts as a leader of this little battery on the c file. e3 it is, knight a6, knight a6, knight d7 is the other move. If knight d7, the bishop's unprotected. There might be this idea present for the white side, taking advantage of this fact, bishop being unprotected. Knight a6, this bishop stays defended, and black looks for this nice forward move, landing into the white position. At first glance, well, if the knight goes there right away, you might think he just gets kicked, but one of the ideas black has is to play a4, have the a pawns essentially exchanged, and if you can envision this position right here without the a pawns on board, this will act as a nice home for a knight. Knight b1, some curious moves going on here. Knight going to the side, this knight going here first and then dropping back. Well, he's looking to jump into c3, a4, where he can now exert some pressure on the black queen side. Black goes for a minor piece imbalance, capturing the knight, pivoting in the center, that strong post e4. And now, after queen to e2, we have a big think here. Carlsen going now for, excuse me, he's going for a4. This is a committal move. There's a couple of things that I'd like to reference right now. Black, at this point, is playing without their dark square bishop, and they are considering, well, clearly they were considering this move a4. If you're playing without your dark square bishop, and to emphasize this fact a little bit more, if you're playing without a dark square bishop, and your opponent still has a dark square bishop. The exact case right here. If you're considering moving one of your pawns that's currently positioned on a dark square, you might need to be very, very careful. Your dark squares could turn out to be that much more weakened and quite possibly taken advantage of. After this a4 move, well, about nearly 20 minutes was spent on this a4 move. Why exactly? Well, this is the follow-up that needs to be considered. There's some serious, black's now going to find themselves in a pin. If white decides on bishop a3, what are you going to do? Put your knight in a pin? I don't know about that. You're going to go here, and now your queen is tethered to the defense of this knight. It's a bit uncomfortable. The best reply would be c5, having the pawn be in a pin. But now there's these moves that need to be calculated. Capturing on d5. What about the knight being kicked? He has to go here. What about a capture? White is now up a pawn. I recognize these are double isolated pawns, a bit weak. After knight c7, we could have knight c6 developing, hitting the bishop, defending a4. This pawn still lives for a little bit. Bishop can drop back. The knight can be hit. This is a very lengthy continuation, quite forcing on white's part. White seems to be the one who is dictating play and still has this pawn plus and the bishop pair. This f3 move, when I was looking into this game here, preparing to do a video such as this, the move suggested here at this stage is f4, and it was one that kind of made me cringe a little bit because it weakens the g4 square. I thought, whoa, this knight is not too far off from occupying that square. Do you really want to do this? Well, this queen, keep in mind, if the knight is trying to jump in here real quick, hang on. Queen c6, and she is super active and not long off. Black can be reminded that this bishop is in fact in the game. If b6 is no longer on board, here comes c5, and this can get broken down very, very quickly. Anyhow, my main point here is to be very careful. Black is minus a dark square bishop. White has a dark square bishop, and black is moving a pawn off of a dark square. Bishop a3 would have been the move to try to maintain a slight advantage for white. However, white, spending quite some time himself, about 24 minutes, opts for knight to c3, and this is where things shift slightly. It's roughly, it's about an equal position with this move here, knight c3. And with this move, we now have a pretty forcing line. Several exchanges happen, and we zip to move 25 pretty quick here. There's a lot of pressure being placed against b3. Not so many options with these next dozen moves. Knight takes knight. Pawn takes knight. Some thought was spent on this one here. About 3 minutes was spent on this capture. Why not this capture? Well, for one, this is some idea that might be present. The e6 pawn, in other words, is a bit accessible, a bit more vulnerable, maybe even bishop to h3. And black is having to devote a piece to defending that point. So it's the d pawn that recaptures. One other reason to maybe go with the d pawn recapturing is because if you're going with this, now this pawn can make a capture at some stage, and this rook is brought to life somewhat. So it is the d pawn that recaptures on e4. White needs to defend b3. Black piles up on b3. Bishop c3. The queens are off. The rook is going to get that pawn back. Black lands a fork, picks up the dark square bishop. White gets the light square bishop in exchange, and this is where we stand. A lot of smoke has cleared here. We're in an ending. The queens are off board. Both sets of rooks, a minor piece each. This is the main imbalance here. Well, I don't even know if I could say that's the main imbalance. That's probably the main imbalance here to focus on, the knight versus bishop. But this is also a very weird structure, not so common a structure right here. So these are the things that factor in. These are the things that capture my attention when I look at this position and I'm trying to evaluate, I'm trying to assess this position. I'm trying to see who has the superior minor piece, whose minor piece is better off, who would I rather be in this position. This rook is very active. This knight has the potential to land a fork, or excuse me, a check, maybe a fork at some point, who knows. So it's still quite difficult to assess at this point. The computer will rattle off several different options here for the white side, and it's about all equal. The move played as a follow-up here is rook to e7, which is quite a fine move, just putting pressure on this pawn, and the end result of this, these next couple of moves, black has to do what? Black has to defend e6. He does just that, and black is now having to do what? Recapture, and black is now slightly inconvenienced, right? He was on an open file. He's having to now recapture, and he's pulled to this closed file. He'll get back to being active. This next move is a very important one, I think, at least. The move played was rook to a1, but another move to have given strong consideration to was the move f3. And I really would have been curious to know how black would have replied to this. f3 is looking to exchange the one pawn, to exchange off black's e4 pawn so that this bishop can finally see a little bit more of the world, see the queen side of the board. I'm not sure what black's reply would be at this point. If the rook is playing to the a file or b file, let's just say here, going to a dark square, just staying clear of the light square bishop, we could have takes, and what are we doing now as black? If you take like this, there's bishop h3. This is a bit inconvenient to black. How are you defending e6? You have to come over here. That's completely passive. Are you taking with the knight? If you're taking with the knight, well, there's no way white can be worse off. It's probably going to still turn out to be a draw. This pawn is picked up, and the rook would be defending everything. This is probably some draw here with rook b2, and should you really sideline your king like that? There's probably just some little back and forth here. In fact, after king to h3, rook e2, rook takes here, c5, maybe this is a little bit awkward. It's kind of tough spot. If the rook moves, you're dropping this. If the king moves, you're dropping this. Probably best at that point if f3, rook here, takes, rook f4. Probably best at this point would be some type of a repetition. I don't think either side could try for anything more. The f3 break was not played at this point here. Instead, white played within the structure, kept the structure as is. Rook a1, rook d8, bishop f1, c5. This is fixing the pawn on a light square. Also, it's getting a pawn off of the same rank. This might be another way to view it. There's no longer two black pawns on the 6th rank. If they're both on the 6th rank, there might be a variation where the rook is able to take one pawn and be now very quick to threaten to take another. They're a bit, they can't be captured so quickly if some variation like that was to occur. I believe the main point, however, is to make sure this pawn does not move. Fix the pawn on a light square. If he's not able to move, this bishop isn't able to become so activated, getting to c4 and exert pressure on e6. Following up, we have rook a3, knight b1, piece that is now heading for f3, which would fork the king and pawn. Rook a1, a little bit of something is lost with this move right here, attacking the knight. He already wants to go to d2. This isn't so much of an inconvenience to black to have the rook threatening the knight. He's pretty much wanting to go here anyhow on his next turn. A better move would have been to exert some pressure on the black position with rook to a5 or rook to a6. Rook a1 it was, knight d2, bishop e3, and we have now the minor pieces coming off. This pawn is very far advanced, and a bit cramping here to the white side, clearly. This rook is now restricted because there would be a mate threat. White gets some space here for the king. King h2 is now available, and what white is also looking to do is play g4 so that the king can step up to g3 and eventually capture that guy. So black sees this. he stops this idea of g5, playing h5. White still plays g4. Black takes with the f-pawn, and after the recapture, he doesn't capture back like this, instead playing h4. This is a passed pawn, and this is a pawn that's stopping the white king from even getting into a position where he can put pressure on f3. So this is a nice handful of moves here, just a little pawn lesson, I guess, going on right here, recognizing what it is white needs to do to untangle a little bit to improve his king position. This is what white is wanting to do. Black recognizes this and is having a pawn here, which makes the g4 break not as easily. You can't get that in so easily. It still happens. Capture, but now here comes h4. If you do capture right here, there is king h2, there is king g3, and now there's the idea of capturing on g4 and then capturing on f3. h4 interferes with all this. This is now a passed pawn, and soon enough we have actually this pawn he's going to soon be a connected passed pawn with g5 looming. So after rook d2, pressure on f2, it's king h3, g5, this pawn is going nowhere. This pawn has pressure on him, and what are you going to do at this point? You can't really save the f2 pawn. If you play rook to f1 at this point here, you're completely passive, and black can slowly improve their king position. King f7, what do? King to h2. This king can't go too far, keep in mind, because this pawn is passed. There's king g6, and now what exactly? King g1 trying to have a little bit of a role reversal, defending f2, which would free up the rook. There's now a rook to c2. Don't forget about c4 or g4 or e5. Very weakened white pawn structure. So this is completely passive. White tries something active with e4, clearing the way to exert some pressure on the f3 pawn. Rook d4. White inserts a check. The king goes up here so that when this pawn is now captured, it will happen with check. Rook a3. Rook takes c4. This is the more valuable white pawn. These two are double isolated pawns, so grabbing the c4 pawn, he's more important. This pawn here on c5, he's now passed. Rook takes f, king e7, and the idea here is to simply march the passed pawn c4, rook d3, can't stop the pawn if there's the rook exchange, rook check, king d8, you don't want to allow the white rook to get behind this pawn, king d8 interferes with that, king g2, the pawn continues to march, rook a4, one step away, rook check, king h3, and what do you really do on the white side here? After king to d7, the rook is very limited, doesn't have very many choices. He could only shuffle a little bit. Rook f2, and now the rook is that much more limited in this position. If he goes to c3, there's actually this little deflection. Rook takes, and then black promotes. The other idea would be to play here, but now black just scoops up this pawn here. King h2, and pick your favorite move. I mean, you could go here if you wanted to. You could go behind the pawn. All of these pawns are ready to fall, and this is completely busted. What did happen in the game after rook to f2, white tries f4. The rook inserts a check first, inconveniencing the white king. After he drops back, now rook takes pawn, and white basically throws in the towel at this point. White resigns. If rook takes pawn here, there's so many different wins. Just scooping up this pawn, connected passed pawns, this is just way too much for white to deal with. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it, and feel free to leave any comments in the comments section below. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.